A case-bound book is your most typical kind of book. The hardcover books on your bookshelves are probably all case-bound. There are two main tasks to creating a case-bound book: creating the cover and creating the text block. These are then joined together with the use of end papers. The first step in creating your text block is choosing and preparing the paper. Once you have all of the sheets cut to the correct size, you'll want to fold them in half. A bone folder to burnish the folds is helpful at this step, but not required. A single folded piece of paper is called a folio. You'll want to gather several folios together to create a signature. How many folios you decide to put together will depend on several things, probably most importantly the weight of the paper. If you are using a heavy artist paper like Rives or Arches, you will probably want no more than 4 folios per signature. If you are using a light text weight paper, then using 8 folios would work fine. It is these signatures that you will sew together to create the text block. Once you have your signatures together, you'll want to mark and pre-punch them. I always create a template for this, particularly if I intend to make more than one of the books I'm constructing. Jog all of your signatures together and place them on the table with the template on top if you're using one, and weight everything down so nothing moves around. Use something stiff like a piece of bookboard to mark against. Drag your pencil up along the bookboard, making sure that each signature gets a tick mark at that point. Continue along in this fashion for each mark where you will make a hole to sew through. You'll want to make one extra mark on just one side of the signatures. This will only be used as a reference mark, and you won't be punching holes through these marks on each signature. The purpose of this mark is to keep your signatures correctly aligned. It is very easy to get turned around as you are sewing because you'll be moving the text block around, but you want to keep each signature correctly aligned with the others, and this reference mark will help you do that. Next, you'll pre-punch the holes using a sewing needle. To make the needle easier to use, you can give it a temporary handle by shoving the eye of the needle into a cork. This gives you something to hang on to. Jog all of the pages in the signature together and hold them tightly as you poke a hole through each of the marks you've made. Keep your needle as perpendicular to the pages as possible. You want the hole to be in the same position in each piece of paper in the signature so they aren't skewed once you start sewing them together. Remember that you don't want to put a hole in the reference mark. Do this to all of the signatures and maintain the orientation as you finish each one. Next, you want to prepare the thread. A good rule of thumb is to start with the length of the book times the number of signatures you have, plus extra for the tails at the beginning and the end. You can always add thread later if this isn't enough, but this general measurement usually works. You'll probably want to run the thread through your fingers a couple of times to relax the tension so it doesn't tangle while you're sewing. Finally, you can start sewing. Start from the outside of one signature and push the needle into the center of the signature. Pull the thread through, leaving at least a 3-inch tail behind. Sew out through the next hole. Go back in through the next hole and out through the next. Continue this process in and out through the holes that you've marked and pre-punched. When you get to the last hole, you should be on the outside of the signature. At this point, you will want to tighten the stitches. Make sure you've left a reasonable tail behind, at least 2 or 3 inches. Grab the next signature and align the reference point with the first signature. Sew from the outside into the center of the second signature, back out through the next hole, back in, back out until you reach the end. You should be back on the outside of the signatures at this point, on the same end of the spine where you first started. Make sure that all of the stitches are taut and remember to pull your thread parallel to the spine to keep from ripping the paper. Now tie the thread and the loose tail together into a simple square knot. Make this knot tight, but not overly so. Align the next signature and begin this process again, sewing in and out of the holes that you've pre-punched. Once you reach the end of the signature, with the thread on the outside of the spine, you'll make a new stitch called a kettle stitch to join this signature to the rest of the signatures. Snug up your stitches. To create the kettle stitch, Pass the needle under the stitch in the first two signatures, bringing the needle between the two signatures from the inside of the signature to the outside. Then bring the needle back up through the loop that is created in the thread. Pull this taut, holding the signatures together tightly as you do this. Continue this process with the rest of the signatures, linking each new one to the others by using the kettle stitch at the end of each one until you get to the last signature. For the last signature, create a normal kettle stitch between the previous two signatures. Then create a second kettle stitch between the last signature you just added and the previous one. This double kettle stitch will finish off the sewing and you can trim the thread. Next, you'll want to glue the spine. Weight or clamp the text block so that the signatures can't move around or shift. If you don't have a book press, you can use a fabric-covered brick or some heavy books as a weight. Using the tip of your finger, apply a coat of PVA glue along the entire spine, covering the thread and making sure that the glue is filling in between the grooves of the signatures. Leave the book weighted or clamped until the glue is completely dry. The next steps include adding the end papers, mull to strengthen the spine, head and tail bands to hide the spine and add a bit of decoration, a ribbon bookmark, and a piece of rice paper to finish it all off. First, you want to choose your end papers and cut them to size. Make them exactly the same height as your text block and twice as wide. Fold them in half with the decorative side inside if they have a decorative side. Next, you'll glue these end papers to the text block. You only want to apply glue to a small portion of the folded edge, about 1/4 to 1/2 inch along the edge. Apply the glue on a piece of scrap paper and use another straight piece of scrap paper as a glue barrier. Carefully attach these to each side of the text block. If the decorative portion has an obvious orientation, be aware of this as you place these end papers. Once you've glued both end papers, put the text block under weight to allow it to dry as you prepare for the next steps. The next step is to add some reinforcement to the spine. This is done with a material that has several names. In the bookbinding world, it is called Mull or super. You can also use cheesecloth, which is available at any supermarket or drugstore. Cut the mull so that it's not quite as tall as the text block and so that it wraps around the spine about 1 to 1.5 inches on each side. Apply glue to the spine to attach the mull. Press the mull into the glue. You can even apply more glue after the fact if you need to be sure it's adhering. You can do this with a brush or just with your fingertip dabbed in glue. The mull should not be glued to the end papers yet, so be careful that you're attaching the mull only to the spine. I usually put this under weight temporarily as I work on the next pieces. The next couple of steps will show you how to add some decorative elements. We'll add a headband and tailband and also a ribbon bookmark. None of these are important to the structure of the text block, and you can skip these steps if you want. The material that I'm using for the head and tail band is a specialty material for exactly this purpose and can be purchased at any bookbinding store. Measure and cut the amount of headband material needed for the top and bottom of the spine. Apply glue to the spine with a brush or with your finger and glue these pieces of the headband in place. Add a bit more glue to the piece of headband you just added and then glue the bookmark to the spine. You only need to glue 1 inch or 2 to the spine to give it a solid attachment point. If your text block happens to have a particular orientation, which would be the case if you are constructing it from pages that you've already printed, then be sure you're gluing your bookmark so that it comes up and out the top of the book. As the final step for your text block, you'll glue a piece of rice paper or other lightweight paper over the spine as a liner, covering the bookmark and head and tail bands. Place another layer of glue over the ribbon that you just added and the tail band, as well as the rest of the length of the spine. Attach the paper, press this down and let it dry. Once it is dry and firmly attached, tear or cut off the extra paper on each side of the spine. This doesn't have to be done particularly carefully, as the edges of this paper will never be seen. This completes the text block. Next, you can start on the construction of the cover and then put this all together.